sponsored by Innovasi. Yeah. Do you want to say a few words about Innovasi? Because unfortunately, Innovasi's team from Halifax got turned around last night. Their plane got turned around, and they went back to Halifax because they had a malfunction on the plane. So they went then up to Montreal and down to Boston today. So they're not here yet, but we do have a member of their team here. So,
hi everybody. My name is Nikki Roberts. I work with Innovasi. I am on the marketing side of things, so a lot of our team is product, and unfortunately that Halifax to Boston route is just always a nightmare. We are a fish tracking and aquaculture technology company, and we've been working closely with the town of Plymouth to deploy our AI-based fish counting system. And I think we're very aligned on kind of the overarching objectives of healthier ecosystems, healthier fish populations, and growing the blue economy. And so we're really excited to be here, to be sponsoring this session. If you want to learn more about what we do, we have a booth right outside. But thank you, everybody.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to our Fisheries and Aquaculture panel. My name is Mike Cahill. I work for the town of Plymouth. I'm the Climate Resiliency and Sustainability Planner. Very long title, but really what I do here in town is to work on sustainability on numerous different avenues through transportation, waste, natural systems, buildings, energy and infrastructure, and health, safety, and preparedness. So it's a very all-encompassing position. And the area that's very near and dear to my heart is economic development, specifically with clean tech, climate tech. The blue economy is a large piece of that. As Nikki said, we've been working with Innovasi for 2 years now at this point. We work with them for fish tracking for our river herring. We have an underwater camera that we have here in town. We have two functions of the camera. It live streams our river herring, but also we use motion detection software to record clips anywhere from 10 to 60 seconds when a fish swims past the camera. The problem that we have is we've relied on crowdsourcing for many years. We typically get about 15,000 videos counted, but at the end of the run, there are oftentimes over 100,000 videos. So that takes hours for us to count those, only 10,000. So something that we've been working with Hydro AI on is to count those uncounted clips. Additionally, it helps us with our night videos. Innovasi, they were creating their pilot program. They put out a call for video clips, and I was like, I know some video clips. We do. So they actually counted all our video clips for us within 30 minutes of their AI doing the work. It yielded a 95% confidence interval. So I can't speak highly enough about the relationship that we've been able to build with Innovasi. And I think it's a great opportunity to show how Plymouth can work with companies on pilot programs. So if you have a company within this space and you're looking to test your technology, I really see our role as a way to show that your technology works and get some legitimacy as your construction. So with that being said, I'm going to kick us off with our Fisheries and Aquaculture panel. I'm going to serve as the facilitator. I'm joined here by Laura Anderson, Andy Whitman, and Chad Hunter. I'm going to hand it off to Laura. In terms of structure, what we're going to do is each presenter is going to give a talk from between 5 to 10 minutes about what they do. And then from there, we have some questions that we'll get into a roundtable. And then after that, we'll field some questions from the audience as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Laura.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura Anderson from Eddy Analytics. And what we do is we're focused on bringing digital twin technology into the coastal ecosystem space. You all probably heard a lot about digital twins, but probably more in the industrial space. But this is also an application where we see a lot of use for it in the coastal and marine community. So, as you all know, our coasts today are experiencing all kinds of stress. And so a lot of it can be man-made. I don't know if you remember a lot of the dredging issues that Miami had in 2014 when they killed acres and acres of coral from really unplanned sediment plume. We have great examples, unfortunately, in the south right now after a lot of hurricanes coming through and really eroding a lot of coasts. And we also have a lot of man-made infrastructure going in, which we know really well here in Massachusetts, from offshore impact is going to be. Most of wind farms today have been in the North Sea. Our area is quite a bit different. We really want to make sure that we understand what's happening. A lot of the different studies and environmental impact assessments that have been done today, let's just say they could be a bit better. So when you look at the dredging that happened in Miami, there was a good environmental impact assessment that was done by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, but it still wasn't able to predict what happened, resulting in a lot of unintended impacts. A lot of these types of studies are one and done. You do it to fulfill a requirement and you file it, right? And so that doesn't really help. Your infrastructure ends up being at risk and you have potentially a lot of money that you've wasted and a lot of unintended impact. So what are we doing? So we are trying to make the situation better by coming up with a digital twin. So what we're doing here is combining a lot of different sources of data, so high resolution bathymetry of what we call the container for the ocean. We then add in the hydrodynamic data so that you really understand everything that's happening in the water column, how it interacts with the barriers from the bathymetry. You can then put in the benthic habitats, so finfish, oyster, surf clam, and understand how they're interacting with all of that. And then we bring in satellite data so that you can see what it looks like not only from the top, the bottom, everywhere inside. The sexy part about it though is you can really do what if scenarios and see, okay, if I change something in my coastal infrastructure, I put in a farm, what does that mean? What does it mean now? And potentially what does it mean in 2070 when I'm dealing with all kinds of different future conditions? So this really allows you to simulate a broad range of situations so that you have as much confidence as possible in your outcomes. So we are targeting a number of different customer groups. And so I've mentioned a couple. I'll linger on a few that I didn't mention. So aquaculture, there are a lot of challenges in siting and also in making some critical decisions about whether or not to harvest, when to do work that we think this could be very useful for. Also for restoration projects, there are thousands of miles of shoreline that need to be modeled so that we really understand how we can best conserve it going forward, as well as a lot of different government agencies there. When we think about aquaculture, which is the subject of today's panel, we are thinking a lot about the challenges that the pens have today. So we're thinking more deeper sea aquaculture. When should I lower my pen to survive the storm versus when should I potentially harvest it because it's going to be totally overwhelmed. So these are the types of questions that we're quite good at answering because there is a lot of complexity in the marine environment. It's really hard to fully understand and predict with a good degree of fidelity. So our special sauce is really the stack. How can we combine all of the data that we put together from atmospheric and ocean models? How can we then use open source to a large extent models for hydrodynamic data to simulate what's happening? We can apply analytics so that we can really put those what-if scenarios in place and then visualize it so that someone who's not necessarily an expert in marine engineering can understand what we're looking at and play with it and understand the interactions. As far as we know, we are the only competitor to currently offer that. Most of the other competitors in the space are doing scenarios, but pretty rough with results that we don't see. And so the team consists of me. We are a spin-out of CUI, so we have the Chief Science Officer, Ann Cohen, and our Product Officer, who are both experts in their fields, respectively, at CUI, as well as our particulate modeler. And together we make up Eddy Analytics, where we are revolutionizing coastal ecosystems. So please feel free to get in touch with us. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andy. Thank you.
Hey everybody, I'm Andy Whitman. I founded Seaport Systems to democratize access to oceanographic data. Lots of really cool things happening in the ocean base. space, digital twins, monitoring efforts of all sorts. I found in my experience and the experience of a lot of my neighbors, I'm from Swans Island, Maine, so lots of lobster fishermen, aquaculturists, people who work in waterfronts. This oceanographic data, these models, all this really cool research was trapped in the institutions. It was very rarely making it out to people who could use that data every day. People like harbor masters, fishermen, aquaculturists. These people have incredibly taxing industries and really hard jobs that data could stand to benefit them so much. But they were never getting that because, well, I'll get into that a little bit, but that's me. I make environmental monitoring buoys, so super low cost environmental monitoring buoys. I worked at Woodsville Oceanographic for a while. I come from the aerospace industry. I've been in blue tech startup space here in New England a little bit, but it's kind of my background. A lot of words, don't read them all, but basically what I just said, we lack critical oceanographic data, and that's never getting down to the people who can use it the most. We need it to study ocean health, bolster coastal resiliency, scale aquaculture, scale other at-sea industries, but we can't scale that right now because all the equipment to monitor these things is incredibly expensive, reserved for the institutions. These are $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 instrument systems that are difficult for the scientists to use, let alone, everyday people. They're too expensive, and they're never designed to scale. We have really cool monitoring platforms, tens, hundreds of miles off the coast, but there's like a dozen of them on the East Coast. That doesn't really help you. If you're an aquaculturist and have a site in, a little nook or bay somewhere, that data is totally irrelevant. It's not helpful. So we need to build out networks of monitoring platforms to actually create data where you are. We need this data to build digital twin models. We need this data to understand what's actually happening in our environment. So for the last few years, I've been focused on aquaculture, oyster farming and seaweed farming in Maine. A couple close friends of mine helped kind of narrow challenges and problems. There were a lot of issues with siting new farms, a lot of issues permitting, protecting from environmental threats. Managing the ongoing operations is hard, starting an oyster farm, especially from nothing, let alone scaling that business up. And these are all problems that I think data can really help with. Here's a number of measurements that my company takes across a couple of our buoys. Things like position, temperature, salt content in the water, oxygen content, chlorophyll, currents and waves. And these can all help answer a lot of really important questions in aquaculture and other industries, all sorts of other industries, but aquaculture specifically. This can help you manage your farm, manage your day-to-day operations, figure out, am I growing enough, or are my oysters growing fast enough? Am I going to be able to meet demand in 6 months? Big questions like this. So like I said, I make environmental monitoring buoys. Very few people are making oceanographic hardware, let alone low-cost environmental hardware. So typical systems, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. These are $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 monitoring platforms that get you really important data for your farm, and it gets you that data instantaneously. That's the other big problem. These instrument systems, you don't get that data until you go collect it. Oyster farmers, you need to see what's happening on your site all the time. You can't make decisions with data you don't have. So getting this data into your hands, getting it very quickly, getting it very cheaply is kind of the core of my mission. And so the technology itself, I kind of hit on this a little bit already, but super low cost, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, pretty attainable for a lot of folks. Real-time telemetry, getting that data into your hands as quickly as you can. It doesn't help if you go collect an instrument and it's got the last 6 months of data on it. If you weren't able to see that throughout the course of this video. All my products are modular and open source, maybe a little bit more abstract, but so many industries, aquaculture, research, all of these offshore wind, all of these monitoring efforts, they reinvent the wheel. They reinvent the same four components. They reinvent the housings, the communication, the data processing, and then there's the sensors, the actual measurements. And everybody's reinventing this wheel, and environmental monitoring has never gotten cost effective because everybody's investing all this time and money. If I had a dime for every presentation I went to, a master's student is like, I needed to measure this parameter, and I had no money, and so I spent, a bunch of my own money, and then all of the time dedicated to this research project, building this monitoring buoy, and it didn't really work, but it was a cool engineering project. But this is my, marine biology presentation. I didn't do any marine biology, and so building a platform that everybody else can build on to enable their research or their work or their aquaculture or whatnot. So really important to me, it's an open platform that anybody can use. Low cost. So I have two products, a drifting buoy. This is great for modeling currents. You just chuck it off the side of your boat, watch it drift on a map somewhere, and you now have current data. This is really great for research. Low cost, $2,000. That's super attainable for a lot of folks. And then XPX. This is a half-scale kind of trade show model, but super small, easy to put 10 of these in a skiff, pull them across a set of oyster operations or what have you. That's $3,000. And so the first time this environmental data is accessible from a cost perspective and an ease of use perspective. So that's really key there. Real-time telemetry. Like I said, you can't make decisions with data you don't have. It happens to scientists all the time. You go deploy an instrument, they forget to turn it on, or they have no idea what's going on. They come back to the instrument 6 months later, they have no data because the device was not on. This is such an easy problem to remedy, and if you just had the data coming from the device all the time, you can understand what's happening in your environment, and you can make sure everything's behaving appropriately, but really key to get the information from the water, into your pocket, your phone, what have you, as quickly as possible. That's the only way we can innovate and enable, solutions and enable innovation in your industry. Modular, like I said, one size doesn't necessarily fit all, but 80% of these devices are all the same. We reinvent the wheel constantly, and if we could just make a shared platform that researchers, aquaculturists, carbon capture folks, we could really bring the cost of these instruments down by sharing that and amortizing that development cost across all of these industries. We need pretty much all the same data, so focus on that. And then open source, like I said, all open. Plans for these devices are available. You can integrate. If you're a researcher or a scientist, it's very easy to tap in here, add to it, build to it, fix things. It's really a collaborative effort. All of this, everything should be a collaborative effort, but really leaning on people using these things every day to figure out what do we want to build into it. What is the next step? What is the next evolution of this product? And if it's locked down by patents and trade secrets and all this, nobody's going to get anywhere. It's just me in a room with my thoughts, and that's kind of scary. So, really want to open this up and be, a tool for everybody, but kind of a community as well. It really needs to be a communal resource, and so it's something everybody feeds into, takes out from. That's my company and my monologue. Thank you.
Great, and we'll toss it over to Chad.
All right, so I'm a late addition to this panel, filling an empty seat. I was with Mike on Saturday at town meeting, and he said, hey, how about you come to the Aquaculture and Fisheries panel. So my name's Chad Hunter. I'm the harbor master for the town of Plymouth. I've been doing this job approaching 20 years now. And as harbor master, I have a number of responsibilities in the town. Most of it is sort of surrounding boating safety, making sure people are carrying the right equipment, operating safely, and then the law enforcement component to that. Also, management of the harbor itself, so the piers, any sort of commerce coming and going, seafood, offloading, boating access, dredging, piers, all those other sort of projects that come along with that. But that's not really the reason I'm here. I wear another hat, and that's a shellfish constable. So that's really what brings me to this board this afternoon. And kind of a really interesting story. Harbor master and shellfish constable, at least in the town of Plymouth, sometimes they're two separate people in other communities. In Plymouth, it's always been one person doing both roles. And shellfishing for a number of years, when I first started, it was all about recreational shellfishing. So just making sure that we do water quality monitoring with marine fisheries to determine classification areas and what's allowed and not allowed in those areas. The other part to that was sort of managing that fishery. So, if there's enough species to harvest, it's an open area. If there's not, sometimes you close it for management to allow it sort of naturally to kind of come back before you reopen. We do a number of seeding operations to try and encourage shellfish to grow in an area. But that was kind of, at that point in time, that was kind of our efforts, recreational. In 2009, was approached by three gentlemen that actually had a mussel farm that went back to the late 80s. And, in Plymouth, we have Duxbury just to the north. Has been raising oysters for a number of years, and Wellfleet, Barnstable, and a number of other communities around us that were producing oysters, but at the time Plymouth didn't have any aquaculture sites, and we weren't really producing anything as far as shellfish goes for commercial fisheries. So these three gentlemen came to myself and they said, hey, we'd like to reestablish our mussel grant from the late 80s, but we want to grow oysters. And so, we took that in and kind of kicked that idea around. At the time, I was just appointed harbor master for the town. I was the assistant beforehand, and thought it was a good idea. We've been seeing traditional fisheries sort of decline over the years. Back when I was a kid here in Plymouth, we would have 30, 40 draggers tied, 8 feet or 8 boats wide on the piers. Now we're down to, there's one guy here out of Plymouth that is a ground fisherman. So we've seen that decline in your traditional fisheries, and aquaculture is sort of the future, the put and take fishery. And so we decided to give it a whirl. And I remember going to the first public hearing and to approve those 3 licenses. And as those were approved, my inbox was flooding with other people that wanted sites, that wanted to do aquaculture, that wanted to raise oysters. And we saw this really tremendous interest in that fishery. Some people thought it was very easy. I think at one of the select board meetings, it was said that this was a license to print money. That was a really great quote that I'll never forget. But so, we had this tremendous interest. We had to develop regulations. We had to really we ended up creating a waiting list just to handle those interested people as the sites became available. And so now, kind of fast forward to today, we have, I believe, 32 individual licensed sites, which in most cases represent an individual small business, and a little over 100 acres of aquaculture space Bear Plymouth Harbor. So we've seen this grow pretty rapidly, considering, and we've had some people make a go at it and it didn't work out, and those are going with different people. So we have seen some attrition. A lot of that has to deal with some of the storms we've been seeing. Obviously, COVID had a huge impact because typically oysters are something you would enjoy at a restaurant. So they saw a very severe decline when restaurants closed. But that's already started to rebound. I think the restaurant industry seems to be doing quite well once things kind of open back up. So that's my history. I didn't know a ton about aquaculture before this started. I really, based on the interest and the demand, and really living through this, I've gotten pretty proficient over the years. I've seen, sort of both sides to this, worked closely with the growers to support what they're trying to do, but also from the town and state side, some of the regulations and hurdles and things that we've had to deal with over the years there too. So that's kind of why I'm here, my brief introduction, and glad to be on the panel, and look forward to discussing it a little more. Thank you.
Thank you again, Chad, for filling at the last moment. Chad's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to aquaculture, so it's a pleasure to have him here in town and a great resource for us to have. So as you can see, we have a very exciting panel here with two innovators in the technology field, and we also have an aquaculture manager. So we have some questions about the aquaculture and fishery industry. At that point, if there's any questions from the audience, we're more than happy to include those in the discussion as well. So I'll kick it off with our first question. From your perspective, is there enough data that's currently being gathered on fisheries and aquaculture?
I think our general answer is no, right? And I think Jack can probably speak to this as well from the time when you tried to set this up. Like many things in the US, there's so many different agencies involved in collecting data, federal level, state level, local level. It's not necessarily the same data, it's not necessarily statistically significant, it's not necessarily the same time frame. Right? So you've got all of these different points, but there's not really an industry standard in the US for what we should be looking for. And I think that's a big challenge.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever enough data. I guess I don't even know if I should tell this story. I got into this because I gambled on baseball a lot. I love Billy Bean, and the idea of like this data analytics around baseball was super fascinating. And I was like, wow, this is great. We should apply this to lobster fishing, because this is like my homegrown industry. And then come to find out, there's like no data. There's no data about it at all. And so that was kind of the light bulb moment for me. And then I finished college and went to the Oceanographic Institute, where it's kind of the leader in ocean research and ocean data, and they collect a lot of cool stuff. They're doing a lot of like really incredible work, but that data is so siloed, it was never getting out. Like what was collected, which I still think is not enough, was never getting out, and even when it was never getting out in a meaningful way. I mean, there are aquaculturists in the audience. Do any of you use ocean data that comes from NOAA or WUI? Or I feel like that answers the question. Like, this is not getting out in a meaningful, impactful way, and so we really need to think through what data do we need, how does that look, what does that look like for you, and how can we make that happen? Like I said, total respect for the incredible scientific pool we have. They collect a lot of cool data, but I think like that incredible knowledge pool is almost hindering us. Like they've got systems that work for their research, and they've done a good job of pooling what data they have. But a lot of them have no idea what it's like to run an oyster operation or be a fisherman. And so they're incredibly proud of the incredible systems they've built, but they have no use for you. And so I guess that's kind of core to my mission, is getting more data and making it actually meaningful and impactful, because that's a huge part too. The data is useless if we collect it or not. It's not making a difference. So no, there's never enough data.
If I could follow up to that, where do you see the most gaps?
That's a good question. Spatially, there's very little data being collected. The big monitoring networks that we're really proud of are these buoys that are 20, 30, 40, 100 miles off the coast. Like I said earlier, that data does not help you as an aquaculturist in the harbor here. That data is totally irrelevant. And so we need like much denser spatial data so we can actually understand what's happening, the little micro effects that are going on in the water. I don't know about Plymouth so much, but on Swans Island we have 3 oyster farms in the harbor. They all produce at drastically different rates. They grow differently. They taste differently. And I mean, that's
Do you know why?
no, not yet, because there's no data out there. So we're working on it. But spatially, I think we need far denser data is the biggest gap.
Yeah. So as far as data goes, I typically will see the data that come out of these reports or surveys or white paper studies, and sort of static data like the snapshot in time. When I looked up Andy before I came up here to see what he had for monitoring devices, I was like, yeah, we need to buy one of these. I think having that right, readily available, and like you can pull out your smartphone and you can bring that stuff up. I've seen stuff similar to this where I think it was like WeatherPack. They produce these like government weather sensors and things, and they were big in the farm industry where people literally have sensors throughout their farm, and it's creating efficiency by it's raining, you don't have the sprinklers on type mentality, which I think saves costs. I think it produces probably more crops or better crops, and it gives them I think the ability to kind of track what they're doing on their farm on a micro scale versus like looking at a bigger generalized picture of what conditions you might have. So I can absolutely see this stuff working, but I think data is really important. I think as we are forced to be more efficient in what we do, whether that's wild fisheries or more on the aquaculture side, I think really that's an important piece to what we're doing.
So follow up to Andy's point too, aquaculturists in the room, many of you said that you didn't use the data. If there was data available that was more accessible, is that something that you would use? In what areas or what types of data would you be looking for?
Feel like kind of the water temp just to see whether they're pumping or not.
Sure.
That's kind of one of the main things. And it's like the levels of the food in the water. I kind of say just to see, okay, they're eating a lot. All right, it's starting to die down towards the end. Maybe it can start rising. That kind of working with it.
Great. Anyone else?
At Roger Williams University, we use, you mentioned NOAA. Having depth charts and mapping, that's obviously been huge. But the increase in real-time forecast is also great in terms of day-to-day operations around weather, even above the water. I feel like in my life that's gotten a lot better. As far as NOAA and that data set goes, there is some quite a few impacts from those wave movies can be seen, sure, especially in Rhode Island, and our neck of the woods. Not so much up in the bay, but definitely out around. So.
Great. It's very helpful.
I think that brings up a good point too. One of the things I wanted to mention about this. So Vibrio controls at the state level, that's really, has it been 5, 6, 7 years now that we've been dealing with Vibrio controls? Yeah, so for people producing oysters, Vibrio is obviously a bacteria that is naturally in the water column, and one of the things that can occur is between the time of harvest to landing to somebody eating an oyster, the bacteria can develop in an oyster and you eat it and get sick, really sick. So one of the things where data has been helpful, and you mentioned forecasting tools, which kind of prompted this thought. So they obviously, this is a food safety thing. Most oysters are consumed raw. So, that's food grade. The idea is to get it on ice and get it to refrigeration as quickly as possible. But one of the things that I think is very helpful, there are some forecasting tools, and they're basically taking water temperature, air temperature, and sort of producing this model where growers can go online and take a look at that to kind of see where, obviously, really hot days, we're in the red. So that is super important to get your product on ice as quickly as possible versus days, I was going to say like today, but today's like 80 degrees, so probably not a good example, but much cooler temperatures, maybe you don't have as much sunlight, so you get some cloud cover, and that's obviously helpful. So, real-time data is huge. Forecasting tools that maybe take that data and put it into a more usable, even more usable form, like this. If you look at it online, it's like a heat map of like, blues are cold and reds are hot. So like you kind of look where you are and see where you are as far as risk for Vibrio. So definitely very useful.
And from the municipal perspective, I'm obviously not an aquaculture manager like Chad is, but when it comes to restoration, my department does a lot of restoration. Data collection is huge for us. If we're making policy decisions, it's important to leave a baseline, understanding where we're currently at. My background is in policy. I strongly believe that all policies are built on best scientific, economic, and social data. So for us to understand where we're going, we have to understand where we're coming from. So for those restoration initiatives, baseline data is Chad referenced fluctuations in weather. And this is our next question. How is climate change affecting the fisheries and aquaculture sector?
Pretty hugely. I was chatting with a recreational fisherman in New Jersey, and he's about 75 years old. And so he was telling me that all of the species that he used to fish when he was a boy learning with his dad, they're totally gone now. And so I think the official number is something like most species move at this point about 11 kilometers north a year. And when you look at that over the course of somebody's lifetime, and depending on where the frontiers of their range are, you see what happens. Essentially all the fish from your childhood potentially displace north. If you're lucky, they displace relatively well and they can adapt to their new environment, maybe go deeper, go further north, etc. But they're hugely impacted. And we all know fish reproduce relatively rapidly with variation, but it's changing so much that it's putting them under pressure. And of course, as they move north, there are other fish as well that have similar problems. Some of them can't move further north because they're in the Arctic, right? What's going to happen to them? And with that as well, along with migration, you see the rise of more different kinds of algae, bacteria, and then issues along the entire chain, right? Because the fish eat things. And then they are eaten in their turn. So those ecosystems as well get totally disrupted. So we can definitely see that there's going to be a big impact, and I think there's going to have to be a lot of focus really on how do we make our farms more robust, how do we potentially adapt them by either going north or engineering much more quickly fish or shellfish, et cetera, that can really adapt to these new types of circumstances. And it's a big challenge to get those.
Yeah, I would say the changing, the disrupted ecosystems is really the biggest piece. I don't want to add too much. You hit the nail on the head, but we talk about climate change as this big long-term thing. And it's like, yeah, lobster move, or fish, whatever, move, north 10, 15 kilometers a year. Great, it's a slow change that's evolving, and, with every degree of sea temp increase, things move further north. But people get lost on that. That's the primary thing they think about. Like a 1 or 2 degree sea change is one thing for the fishery. A tenth of a degree or half a degree is all it takes for a new type of algae or some other, critter, something to be viable here. And we have no idea how devastating that can be. Lobster might still be in our region in 10 years based on the sea change, but new algae or new predators might show up and completely devastate that fishery, and we just have no idea of really knowing. So it's the second order effects, or the things that we aren't thinking about or aren't as obvious that are creeping up, and we just need to be ready for that.
Great. Moving on to the next section. We've talked about data quite a bit and how there are definitely limitations and gaps which prevent us from effectively doing restoration. Laura, what are some ways that your company could work with municipalities or city agencies to help with restoration of fisheries?
So what my company focuses on is really having a good model of what today looks like. And we can also do, up to 5-day forecasts out to help potentially with some of the shorter term issues. But we can also help to say, okay, if I'm doing restoration, say we're putting in coral or we're putting in mussels, are they likely to survive here? Is this the best place that I can really put to site them so that, they're at the right temperature, the right salinity, so that when they reproduce, especially if it's larval, where is that going to flow? Is it going to just go out into the ocean and get lost, or is it likely to hit something where it's actually going to embed? Right? So these are the types of questions that we can help with, but as you were saying, it's really important to know what your current situation is and how it interacts, as well as planning for the future. Because you could spend a lot of money on something and then find out that because the sea level rise or maybe the crazy algae, it's not going to work. Right? So we have to go in forearmed as much as possible with a good understanding of the current systems, because that's the only way.
Andy and Chad, this next question might be for you, but we have talked a lot about climate change. Are there any adaptation measures that local fishers or aquaculturists can implement on their sites?
Yes, but I think traditional fisheries industry, obviously, I don't know if anybody saw the WBC booth out front there, but they had lobster gear. It looks like a lobster pond, small, but it has a couple of air tanks in it with a bladder. And really, that is a spin-off of trying to protect right whales and whale entanglements. So clearly, that's technology being used to help that existing fishery continue and minimize the impacts to marine mammals, whales, right whales. Clearly technology has a role. I think what's tricky is getting traditional fishery to buy into technology sometimes can be quite difficult, and the costs associated with that. So yes, I would say on a fisheries, a traditional fisheries industry, yes, technology plays a huge role. I think it's also played a big role in making us so efficient at catching fish that we've done some damage over the years. So I think we got to probably take that technology and try and rebuild existing stocks that used to exist, and then sort of better manage that moving forward. On the aquaculture side, I think that the people in the aquaculture industry, I think are much more likely to embrace technology, just to try and be more efficient with it, because they're spending money on seed, they're spending money on cages, they're putting out that investment. And I remember going to a seminar a number of years ago, probably back when we started up at Salem State, and there was one gentleman, he's right on the board, like, all right, so you put out 1 million seed, and then as, storm hits, he's deducting from that 1 million seed, and then at the end of the day, like, by the time these oysters are to the size where you can bring them to market, you end up with like a small fraction of what you started with. So I think that technology, if that can increase not only their chances of getting that small seed to market size, that's their money, that's their investment. So I think they would fully embrace technology to the largest ability they could.
Great. Andy, could you speak to that a little bit? How you interface with local fishers?
Yeah, I mean, the tagline kind of says it all. Democratizing access to oceanographic data with low-cost data feeds. I mean, the monitoring, the measurements, the insight has been out of reach for a lot of different reasons, and that's what I'm trying to offset. I think that's the biggest way I can help, is bring the information to the table. I'm not the person to evaluate it or figure out what it means or run your farm, but I just having that information is really important. And I guess it's funny, aquaculture and fisheries get worked together because we're all out on the water, but it feels like aquaculture is a lot more like traditional agriculture that has had this incredible data revolution over the last 20 years. And you look at some of the incredible technologies that they have built and now are, everybody has it. You can monitor like individual corn stalks. It's crazy what you can do with satellite imagery. There have been so many innovations, but it just took a leap to like get the data into the hands of people growing, people studying, and so much became clear so quickly. And I don't know where the breakdown really is in the aquaculture world, but I guess I'm trying to kickstart that revolution a little bit and put a lot on the table and put more to it here now.
Great. So Chad, you mentioned the high cost. Andy, I know that you had talked about how your equipment is very cost effective. Laura, can you talk about some ways that maybe you could work with state agencies or municipalities to implement modeling and how that cost could be shared potentially?
Sure. So one of the things that we are looking at with our modeling application is, as you've seen, we have a lot of different customer groups, right? But, let's say a fish farm in and of itself, there's so many more people who could potentially use that data. So what we're trying to explore is who's really the anchor customer, because we have, for instance, just to use an example, currently a really well working model of the Hawaiian archipelago. It was originally commissioned by the state to get a better understanding of their coral reefs, but then when Lahaina, the big wildfire, went through, they kind of called us up and said, hey, can you maybe use it to predict bird pollution that's most likely to impact some of our fish and coral? And unfortunately, they did this after everything had spread, but we were able to predict it really well. So what we're hoping is that we can work with some of these larger anchor customers, whether it be the state of Massachusetts, who's trying to get a better understanding of what's happening in terms of coastal resilience, and then be able to take that information and also spread it in a way that's more easily usable to some of these other use cases, so that people can use it for forecasting and future planning without having to pay necessarily a higher ticket value than they would really want to.
Chad, can you talk about some workforce opportunities in this field? And then Laura and Andy, I'll throw it over to you as well for technology workforce.
Well, like, be looking for workforce, aquaculture or the tech side?
Workforce aquaculture.
We stick with aquaculture. Okay. So obviously aquaculture can be quite labor intensive, and the seed and the gear that you're putting out in the flats very expensive as well. So your success really relies on understanding of what you're doing. I've seen a lot of people get really interested really quickly, thinking that it was a license to print money, because Duxbury, who was 10, 15 years ahead of us, they were doing quite well at the time. So, everybody wanted to be the next Island Creek. But Skip has put in a lot of time and effort to produce and build that brand and sort of get to that successful stage. So over the years in Plymouth, we've seen a lot of people really give it their all. In some cases, investing a lot of money, not really understanding what they were getting into, and losing it all. And unfortunately, in those cases where they invest this money, and whether it's due to storm, mostly a lot of our stuff has been storm damage, or not sort of understanding how to raise shellfish, they lose, and typically they're looking to then transfer their site because they're done. So as far as the workforce goes, obviously we've partnered with a couple of local colleges and tried to create programs that I think that industry is only going to sort of continue to grow. And there's definitely a future there if you're interested in aquaculture. Anything from shellfish to seaweed to salmon to any other fish, even stuff that you would typically think like inland fish. So I think it's a really great opportunity for people. I think there's some sustainability in producing food for the future, whereas some of our wild fisheries are really stressed, and depending on that migration, I can tell you right now, Plymouth, we're concerned about Cape Cod Bay is at the southernmost end of the Gulf of Maine. We're kind of worried about that lobster fishery, migrating north, and our biggest fishery right now is lobster, and I've seen some of the lobstermen that are continuing the lobster, but they're also getting into aquaculture, and I think that's good to kind of diversify and understanding that if that lobster fishery continues to migrate north, 20, 30 years from now, we might not have a really thriving lobster industry here. It could be Maine that's still yeah, even further north. So I think I probably digressed on that a little bit, but I think understanding what you're getting into, whether it's a background, we see a lot of people that work with other farmers to really gain that insight and learn from the lead grower, and then they sort of branch off on their own and take that knowledge with them. So whether it's traditional education or sort of learning through a mentor to get to the point that you can make your leap to do it yourself. All really good things, but definitely it's hard work. It's great to be out in the weather, especially on a day like today, but come back in a couple months. These guys are still out there doing their work. The water's gotten colder, the air temps are freezing, so definitely some really hard work.
And on the technology side, are there any workforce development programs in place, or anything that young technologists could be thinking about?
I'm coming also from kind of the green technology space, and we're starting to really feel much more of a shortage of people who are in STEM and technical roles. And I have a feeling for the blue economy that's going to be true as well, because I think there's more interest coming, and I don't see quite as many grads in that space. It's already pretty tight for us to be able to find hydrodynamic modelers. We because they're just not used that broadly outside of academia. So, and I think the transition from, in some cases, academia to, let's say, more of a corporate business shift is not necessarily going to be what everybody wants to do. So I think for the economy to really take off, there's probably going to need to be more people in those specific STEM fields, which have been, let's say, much smaller based, just comparing to like civil and mechanical engineering.
I don't want to contradict that. I don't know if
Feel free.
I don't know if I'm about to do that.
Go ahead.
And this is probably tangential, but I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. I barely made it to or through college. I'm kind of shocked I did. There's a lot of, knowledge in engineering. There's a lot of schoolwork that you can do, but in a different life, I would have gone through an apprenticeship or something. And I feel like I would have come with the same skills, with the same drive, same passion, and same result. And so there are tons of engineers. There's more people who tinker and build things. College degree is not necessarily a license to do that. There's so many other outlets that I've spent the last 3 years running this company, and I joke it's like kind of an unofficial master's degree. But if I spent, the way too much money I did on undergrad, just tinkering in my garage, I'd probably be way further along. And that's just me. Everybody's different. But there's just so many people who get sucked into this like school and business, and they get stuck in an office. Like, there's so many people who can have a massive impact building technology like this, or in aquaculture, or hydrodynamic modeling too, probably to a degree. Like, there's just such a broader cross-section of skills that people can develop that I feel like they're not. They get pigeonholed into a degree or a very specific career or job title, and I want to see more people who make things and do things and just are more well-rounded, I guess. We're getting so pigeonholed into specific skills, and then it's not fulfilling and kind of useless outside of a very specific job title. So I guess I want to see more well-rounded people who can actually build things.
I think that what we're saying though is additive because
Probably.
I think the kind of people who are maybe tinkering in their garage, there are definitely those people and always have been. But I think having the chance to be exposed much younger is better. I was chatting with a woman here who, is from one of the before, I think she's calling them pathways schools, where you have the opportunity to really tinker. And if you don't have a parent that tinkers, for instance, you get that experience. And then you can go and kind of be on the more maybe technician path, not to say trades, or then you can potentially go to school. But I think it's that early experience with the tinkering and the playing that really opens your eyes to other experiences. So I'm encouraged to see more of it happening. But I think we need much more of it because there are so many options for people today. And this is an exciting area that we hope is really going to take off in the next, I think it's taking off now, but we should see even more in the next 10 to 15 years. We need more people.
And all these fields and things are more accessible than they've ever been before. It's never been easier to learn programming or hydrodynamic modeling or electrical engineering. These buoys are cool. It's novel, but it's nothing that a dedicated high school student can put together. It's not insanely complex, and the resources are out there for free for everyone. And so if people just felt like they had the license to do stuff, they would do it. It's totally early exposure to do stuff.
Great, that's awesome. We have roughly 10 minutes left, so I wanted to open it up to questions. Mr. Mitchell in the back.
Your former baseball coach.
Oh, nice. Coach.
Incredible outfielder, very strong, hit home runs.
Make me blush up here.
Bill is a longtime Plymouth resident, recreational fisher in the harbor, love oysters, so I'm very interested in this conversation, but also president of Massasoit. So I appreciate the discussion around education. One of the things that we struggle with, and nothing against four-year degrees, master's degrees, we struggle that oftentimes employers look beyond the associate's degree or look beyond the training someone has received at a community college. But I think you see kind of this perfect storm in a good way happening. You got this blue economy that's going to explode. You don't have enough people to work. We have free community college. We have the future workforce here. So I think it's important, and Chad, it was interesting listening to you talk about aquaculture. I immediately said, what are the educational opportunities that help out, whether it's internships, which could lead to jobs afterwards. So I think there's got to be that partner between business, cities and towns, and the two higher institutions you have at your disposal. You have Cape Cod Community College, 30 miles to the south, Massasoit, 30 miles to the north. We've got quite a bit of area covered. So I think understanding that not all jobs require those advanced degrees, but it's a tough nut to crack. We teach critical thinking, which I think is important, and sometimes you don't come out of high school with those skills. This sounds like critical thinking is going to play a big part of the success of these types of industries. But thank you for coming. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
I'm from the traditional fisheries, still out there, survive. But we have a couple of things coming down the way that, as you put it, are ecological disruptions. We have climate change that we're seeing, we have offshore development, incredibly fast-paced, taking up incredibly large enough to run up there, and sometimes directly on top of historical fishing grounds. So your presentation with any analytics, I thought was fascinating, because we do not right now, having some experience working with offshore wind developers, with some research, we're not seeing holistic approaches, we're seeing these studies, and we're often seeing one and done, which tell you nothing, except for what you just did in those 3 weeks or month, and they're not even comprehensive of all fisheries that took place in those areas. So I was wondering if you have been reached out to from either any research foundations, fishery research foundations, or even the offshore wind farm companies for research with those, I'm sorry, what did you call them? They were digital twins. I had never heard of that before. And I thought that was fascinating. But have you been reached out to do any work?
Yeah, so we're talking with the state of New Jersey. So when they did their first leases for offshore wind, they very cleverly set aside a relatively large pot of money because they realized that the North Sea is not fiddling. And so they really wanted to have a chance to holistically study and get a good baseline of what's happening in the region before the farms go in, to monitor that process, and then how it's going all the way through decommissioning. So they are really thinking end to end. And so we just put in a proposal to really monitor what's happening in the benthic ecosystem before, during, and after, so that we can get that picture. And also in the Twin, there are already a lot of grants that they've already given, a lot that are associated with traditional fishing, there's some acoustic monitoring, et cetera. And so we want to be able to try and place all of that in the Twin so that you can really see what is happening. Because there are a lot of questions to which unfortunately the answer with offshore wind right now is we don't know. Europeans have been doing it for 30 or 40 years, but it's not the same ecosystem. And we just don't know. So I think approaches like that, where we acknowledge that the questions exist, and we do our best from the very beginning to establish the baseline that you were talking about and learn from the facts, is crucial. Because we have to have cleaner energy, but we don't want to ruin the ocean, right, in the process, or the associated livelihoods. So what we're trying to figure out is how we can really best coexist. And I think New Jersey's doing a good job there, and I think other states will follow.
So nothing in Southern New England now?
Nothing at the moment, but we were just incorporated in June, so a lot of our discussions are just starting. So we want to talk as well with Massachusetts. I think Virginia is also looking at some huge leases, so we're trying to get well known, because this is also an area where the US environmental solutions firms, they don't know offshore wind very well either,
Right.
right?
So also, so I'm from Mass, I'm a resident, but I work for a company on River Island.
Yeah.
And one of our main fishing routes is off Southern New England, off
Yeah.
Massachusetts. So when you think of Southern New England, be sure to like look into,
Yes.
we have New Jersey, but Rhode Island, New
Yes.
York as well. So.
And have a look wherever they have money to give it a shot.
Yeah.
So if you have ideas, let me know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you all for coming. And I'll hand it over to Michelle. Next steps.
Thank you. So thank you for that. We have a 15-minute break. It is a cranberry-themed break, so just for the fall. And then I hope everyone will come into the next room for the public policy roundtable, the marine policy roundtable. That is going to be so interesting, and we hope you have a lot of good questions for that. So thank you very much. Everything's on the bar out there.